We begin in The Hague, where the International Court of Justice is preparing to hear arguments that Israel is committing genocide in its war on Gaza. The case is being brought by South Africa and accuses Israel of violating the 1948 UN Genocide Convention by carrying out mass killings, expulsions, and making statements describing Palestinians as subhuman. More than 23,000 Palestinians have been killed so far, nearly half of them children. The UN says Gaza has become uninhabitable. In a moment, we'll speak to Fahmi Miller in Pretoria, Hani Mahmoud is in Gaza, and Stephanie Decker in occupied East Jerusalem. But first, to Osama bin Javed at The Hague. And Osama, talk us through what we're expecting in court today.
As you can see behind me, the sun is beginning to rise over the Peace Palace here in The Hague, where this landmark case is shortly going to commence, where South Africa is going to convince the International Court of Justice that what it deems Israel is doing in Gaza amounts to genocide. And it is not at this moment wanting or looking for the International Court to declare it as genocide, but immediately act to stop what it deems as acts of genocide. So there is a long laid out 84-page document with hundreds of footnotes where it has collected evidence from international news organizations, NGOs, UN rapporteurs on various issues regarding this conflict, on indiscriminate bombing of civilians, on mass displacements, on targeting of facilities such as cultural centers and health facilities, on all the acts that Israel has not just carried out but also declared intent. There's a 4-page section which looks at the statements that have been made all the way from the president to the prime minister to various ministers in the Israeli government, where South Africa says is not just intent but actions on the ground. On today's hearing, it is going to present its case, and there's going to be a rebuttal on Friday from Israel. So there is going to be arguments that are going to be presented, and it is expected that this is going to not just, it is commenced, but it is not going to be concluded before years to come.
Osama, what's happening outside court? We can see people rallying behind you, carrying Palestinian flags, it looks like.
Well, hundreds of people have been gathering here at the Peace Palace, even a day before this hearing was going to commence. Protesters we've met and pro-Palestine activists who've come from all over Europe. We met people from Germany, from Spain, from here in Netherlands and other places as well. They say that they're here to show solidarity and support to what the South Africans are saying, that they don't see this as they see this as an open and shut case, where the actions on the ground for 96 days are ample evidence that there has been an indiscriminate bombardment of atrocity crimes which have been carried out by Israel. They say they don't want to just show support for South Africa, but also to say to the world, the leaders who are supporting Israel, that this has to stop now, and they are going to continue to put pressure on everyone so that the genocide, according to them, in Gaza can stop.
Osama, thank you very much for that. Osama bin Javed, live at The Hague. Let's go now to Fahmi Miller. She's joining us from South Africa's administrative capital, Pretoria. And Fahmi, how is this case being watched there, especially given South Africa's historic support for the Palestinian cause?
Well, if we look at what South Africa, the government has said in the last 3 months, they've made a number of strong statements against what is happening in Gaza, against the Israeli government, and of course leading to this point where they've taken that court bid to the ICJ, accusing Israel of genocide. That move has been welcomed by many South Africans and is well supported. In recent weeks, South Africa, in recent months, the government has recalled its diplomatic staff from Israel, and prior to that had also recalled its ambassador and had also put forward a vote in South Africa's parliament to end relations with Israel, at least for the time being, until there is a ceasefire. So these are all the actions that have led up to this point, and so many South Africans are not necessarily surprised. We've heard from the South African government, including the International Relations Minister, Naledi Pandor, who has said that Israel has an added obligation as the occupier of an occupied territory and people to abide by the genocide conventions or prevent genocide, including what South Africa is calling collective punishment. While there are many South Africans, like the many behind us, who have come to the Palestinian embassy where we are to watch proceedings at the court, there is also the Jewish Board of Deputies, which says represents the Jewish community in South Africa, and it's condemned the South African government, saying that rather than approaching the court, this is time that could be spent in a positive way, what it says a more positive way, and speaking to both sides in this conflict. It has been critical of the South African government throughout the war on Gaza. Their position hasn't changed. But given South Africa's history of apartheid, colonialism, and racism, this is something that many South Africans identify with very strongly in terms of the subjugation of a specific ethnic group, the targeted killings, subjugation, racism, as well as the difficulties, the many difficulties that Palestinian people are going through in those territories.
Fahmida, thank you very much for that. Fahmida Miller with a view from Pretoria. Let's go now to Hani Mahmoud. He is joining us live from Rafah in southern Gaza. And Hani, how do people there feel about the case at The Hague? Do they have any hope that it can stop the violence against them?
Yes, well, so far, just from talking to people briefly here, just a great deal of hope. That is still a bit of suspicious optimism of what's going on. They are happy and hopeful that finally a country like South Africa is hearing their misery and suffering and taking the perpetrators to the International Court of Justice. And a great deal of hope, but at the same time, it's coming with suspicious optimism, because they know that part of this actions will be taken to the UN Security Council, where there's a high possibility a country like the United States will veto any actions in favor of the Palestinian, just citing past experiences and examples of how the U.S. vetoed resolution calling for a permanent ceasefire and into the war on the Gaza Strip. So far, we have a group, rights group advocates across the Palestinian territory, seeing these hearing sessions as measures, provisional measures that are intended to stop the situations from getting worse across the Gaza Strip as the war continues to pound every means of life across the territory. And the one priority that they have right now is that Israel to cease the killing of civilians and put an end to all the atrocities committed by the Israeli military. And they also are hopeful that the topic of occupation, that Israel is still effectively occupying and controlling the borders and all the access points to the Gaza Strip, will be addressed in the International Court of Justice. So far, everything on the ground suggests and fit within the allegations of war crimes submitted by South Africa to the International Court of Justice. And what we're talking about is the ongoing constant killings and the maiming of civilians and the forced displacement and the failure of the Israeli military and its government to provide safe place for displaced, for the 1.5 million displaced Palestinian. In addition, the intentional and attacks on UNRWA, United Nations for Palestinian refugee facilities, including evacuation centers and schools, and the obliteration of civic life, all fits the characterization and the definition of war crimes committed so far in the Gaza Strip.
Hani, thank you very much for that. Hani Mahmoud joining us live from Rafah in southern Gaza. And let's cross live now to Stephanie Decker. She is in occupied East Jerusalem. And Stephanie, Israel denying the allegations, as we expect, but it is taking them very seriously.
very seriously. Israeli media had quoted last week that cables were sent to all embassies urging their diplomats to lobby governments to get their support in rejecting this case, and also saying that they need to be more vocal in terms of showing the world that they're trying to get humanitarian aid in. Israel is going to be very keen to remind the world of the atrocities that Hamas carried out on October the 7th. Israel saying that it's the victim, that it is in self-defense, and that it's doing its utmost to try and prevent civilian casualties. You even had the Israeli Prime Minister come out late last night in an English statement posted online, very much a message to the international community, saying that it had no intention of reoccupying Gaza. It had no intention of forcibly displacing civilians, and that it did everything to prevent that. Of course, we're talking over 23,000 casualties, most of those civilians. Now, South Africa's case, which is just about to be heard in the next hour or so, does take all of that in consideration, in the sense that it doesn't just start on October the 7th. It goes back decades. It quotes multiple reports, UN reports, going back, that shows that what is happening has been a pattern of occupation, a pattern of oppression, a pattern of dehumanization that has culminated and escalated to some of its worst after October the 7th. So that's going to take around 3 hours. We'll hear from South Africa. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from Israel. Also, we understand some of the families of some of the hostages have arrived at The Hague to be there as well. Again, Israel very keen to remind the world of the events of October the 7th. And it, of course, says it is carrying all of this out in self-defense.
Stephanie, thank you very much for that. That is Stephanie Decker, live in occupied East Jerusalem.